Yes, good afternoon or good morning, depending on which part of the country you're in. My name is Ruben Torres, Assistant Director of the Human Rights and Diversity Commission, on behalf of Anthony Rosa, the Director of the HRDC. We welcome you to another segment of a program put on by the Human Rights and Diversity Commission, along with the Teamster History Project. Today's topic is Viola Liuzzo, A Light in Dark Times. And today's program will be presented by our local historian, our local expert Teamster historian, Karin Jones. Karin?
Well, welcome everybody. Hope you've had a good weekend so far, and hopefully you will learn a little bit about Viola. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here, and hopefully we will. Come on. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right, good. Well, we talk an awful lot about Viola. We bandy her name about, her picture gets put up, but we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about who she was and what was going on in her life and times, if you will. So that is what I have put together today, taking a little bit of a look at who she is and what was going on at the time of the march where she was killed and how she came to be in that position on that day in Selma, Alabama. So as we go through, if you have questions, the usual thing, I don't have a problem with you asking questions as we go along, or we can wait and do a discussion at the end, whatever works for you. So first up, before I get into talking specifically about Viola's biography, I want to talk a little bit about what was going on in Selma and in the civil rights movement. Now, I will tell you, those of you that have seen my programs before, usually I have a lot of pictures. This one doesn't have as many because I really wanted to get the text up so that you could see her story and the story of the times. So, as we're starting here, Selma, Alabama had a voting rights campaign that was started long before what we consider to be the modern civil rights movement. African American activists founded the Dallas County Voters League, and this became the base for pursuing voting rights and economic independence for the residents of the surrounding area. Selma was also one of the first communities organized in the 1960s by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, commonly known as SNCC. They went in and started training people how to be protesters and what to be aware of when they went down to try to register to vote. They had these crazy exams that you had to take to be able to vote. And if you failed, they would deny your ability to vote. And they would ask some questions like, and I'm not kidding, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? And so you can tell, obviously, it was just a sham. It wasn't a real test at all. Selma also had what was known as the Courageous Eight. The Courageous Eight were all members of that Dallas County Voters League, and they took the chance to invite Martin Luther King to Selma to help them increase their voting rights campaign. And this was not an easy thing to do. They already had eyes on them from the community because they were stepping out of line, if you will, and doing these things. So they had to be very careful as they planned these events. Now, this campaign of bringing Martin Luther into Selma actually was what gave rise to the Selma marches to Montgomery in pursuit of the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And here are the members of the Courageous Eight. The probably the most famous one is Amelia Boynton, who is down at the far uh, corner. She later is injured in the march to Montgomery. But the others are people that we don't hear a lot about, but they were very active and they were really the pioneers in setting up these voting rights and voter leagues for Black residents in the South. And we've got Marie Foster, Ulysses Blackburn, we've got Reverend Shannon, and as we come along, we've got Reverend Frederick Douglass Reese, uh, Reverend John Hunter, James Gildersleeve, and then Ernest Doyle and Amelia Boynton. You probably won't see those names much, but I really wanted to give them 1 minute in the sun, if you will, so that people can start to recognize. And here is a picture of the SNCC group in 1963. Um, SNCC is ready for action. They come, and this was part of their practice. They would do things like blow smoke in your face. They would jump on people. They were practicing their survival skills for being in protest so that they would be able to withstand somebody shouting in their face or blowing smoke in their face or knocking them down or whatever it happened to be. These young people were practicing that so that they did not give up. Now, Martin Luther King did come to Selma along with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and they began a campaign in Selma in 1964 because they discovered, even with these pioneering efforts, there was less than 2% of eligible African Americans who were registered to vote. The fear factor was really large. Um, and as he's starting to plan these campaigns, he speaks to Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson says to him, find the worst condition you can run into, get it on the radio, get it on the television, get it in the pulpits, and get it at the meetings, meaning show it, show it, show it. We've got to bring this underbelly out so that people can see how folks are being treated in the South. And that's exactly what King did. Now, in Selma, once the marches started, and there were a series of marches, there wasn't just one, but the Martyrs of Selma, as I'm calling them, were three people. One was Jimmy Lee Jackson, and his death was actually the impetus for the march to Montgomery, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we have James Rebb, who was a Unitarian minister who heeded Dr. King's call after the first march to come and join and show support for that movement in Selma. And of course, that last one is Viola Liuzzo. A lot of times, and I just want to comment on this, this is what Viola looked like at the March on Selma. And we have the lovely picture of her graduating from high school. And that is always the photo that is used. But in actuality, this is where she was in her life. She was 39 years old, and had 5 kids. So this is what she looked like. And it is interesting. I just want to mention a little side thing. Viola died when she was 39 years old, but sort of coincidentally, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X all also died at 39 years old. All right, so Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jackson was 26-year-old Army veteran, the father of a young daughter. He was a deacon at his church and was very active in efforts to register Blacks to vote. He himself had attempted to register to vote, but had been turned away. So on February 18th, about 200 civil rights protesters held a rare nighttime march in Marion, Alabama, just near to Selma. And as they're marching, uh, suddenly the city's streetlights are cut off, and Marion police officers, along with Perry County deputies and Alabama state troopers, begin to beat the marchers. So Jackson and other marchers, including his mother and his grandfather, sought refuge in a cafe called Max. They thought they might be able to be safe in there. But as witnesses later said, troopers entered to the restaurant and began beating those inside. Jackson was shot in the stomach as he tried to protect his relatives, in particular his mom. And this is another picture of Jimmy Lee, and this was a sign that was posted shortly after his death that the racist killed our brother. Jimmy died 8 days later after his um, being shot. Um, in the hospital was in Selma. Martin Luther King actually spoke at Jackson's funeral, and it was his death, as I mentioned before, that led civil rights leaders to call for a voting rights march from Selma to Montgomery. The idea with the march was that they were going to take Jimmy Lee's body all the way to Montgomery and place him on the steps of the Capitol in protest for what had happened. The march was set for March 7th, 1965, and that day would become known as Bloody Sunday. About 600 people tried to march to Montgomery before being attacked at the foot of the Pettus Bridge by police. And the next person that was one of the three martyrs was James Joseph Reeb. He was an American Unitarian minister, a pastor, and very much an activist in Boston. He was 38 years old when he heeded King's call to come to Selma for the second march in the wake of Bloody Sunday. On March 9th, Reb was, who is a father of four, was eating supper in Walker's Cafe with another group of ministers. Walker's was a colored cafe, but had recently begun serving white customers. So the ministers felt okay there. They thought that people who were involved with the march would be certainly welcoming to them, and they were in the restaurant. However, as Reb and his two colleagues were walking back from dinner, they were attacked by a group of four white men, and Reb was struck in the head with a club or a pipe. They never found it, so they weren't sure exactly what it was. Reb was seriously wounded, but he was refused treatment at Selma's Public Hospital and had to be taken to Birmingham University Hospital, which was 2 hours away. He died 2 days later on March 11th. Three men were tried for Reb's murder, but all were acquitted by an all-white jury. His murder remains officially unsolved to this day. Reb was also eulogized by King, and his death was referred to by President Johnson as he spoke to Congress to get the effort for the Voting Rights Act to be passed. Here's a picture of James Reb, and this is a memorial that is in Selma for him now after his death. And the two men in the picture here, Clark Olson, were the two men that were with him when they were attacked. These men were injured as well, but not fatally so as James was. This is President Johnson addressing the joint session of Congress, pushing for that voting rights bill. And what was so extraordinary about his speech was what he said at the end, and that was, I have it down there at the bottom, their cause must be our cause too, because it is not just Negro, but really it is all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome. And that was the first time anybody in power actually acknowledged and empathized with that civil rights movement that was now building in fervor around the country. On March 16th, 3,500 attended a memorial service for Reb, and several hundred Unitarian leaders joined others. They came to Selma in honor of Reb to push forward with the march that they were trying to organize, the final march. Amelia Boyden, I mentioned her earlier. She was one of the first to form the Dallas County Voters League, and she was also one of the Courageous Eight. She was born in 1911, earned a home economics degree from Tuskegee, and traveled around the state, teaching people how to live better through canning and nutrition and agricultural improvements. In 1930, she met Samuel Boynton. He was a USDA extension agent doing very much what she was doing. And together, they not only continued that work, but they began to start to try to register people to vote and to get them to buy land, despite the Jim Crow laws holding that over them. They would hold meetings in churches and even in homes to try to teach people how to do that. They would help them fill out forms. They would talk to them about how to dress when you went to the bank to try to buy land or when you went to try to register to vote, and what kind of language to try to use. So it was very much a big project. And Amelia actually had a sign in her office that said, "A voteless people is a hopeless people." So they were very engaged in this. As I said, they joined the Dallas County Voters League. And in 1964, Amelia becomes the first Black woman and the first female Democratic candidate to run for a seat in the state Senate in Alabama. Now, she didn't win, but she ran. Now, the thing that people remember most about her was that she was brutally beaten on Bloody Sunday in Selma, and her husband had died by this point. So she was continuing on in her activities on her own. Now, here are some pictures of Amelia. This is her after she had been attacked on Bloody Sunday, and they're moving her unconscious body to somewhere safe. This is her family here. That's her husband and her two sons, who were very supportive of everything their mother did. And here she is. She lived to be 104. In this picture, she and John Lewis and Andrew Young are praying before that first march on Bloody Sunday. And here she is at the 50th anniversary of that march with President and Mrs. Obama and also with John Lewis. Now, Annie Lee Cooper is an interesting woman. She was born in Selma, but moved away, became very much a civil rights activist. She is best known for punching Dallas County, Alabama Sheriff Jim Clark in the face during the 1965 Selma marches. In 1962, she returned to Selma to care for her sick mother and attempted to vote, but was told that she failed the test, the literacy test. Now, having voted in Kentucky and Ohio, being denied to register to vote in Selma really was something that made her angry. And she became very active in the civil rights movement in Selma. Um, she also ran into problems because she was very vocal about what she believed in, what she was trying to do. Her attempt to register to vote again in 1963 and her encouragement of her colleagues to also register resulted in her being fired from her job as a nurse in a rest home. She was also struck with a cattle prod when she approached the register office. She had a hard time finding a job because of her affiliation with the Montgomery March. So on January 25th, 1965, Cooper went to the courthouse again to register to vote as part of the Montgomery Marches and King's campaign to get people registered to vote. While she was in line, Cooper was hit in the back of the neck by Jim Clark with a baton and told to leave. She turned around and hit Clark in the face and knocked him to the ground. She proceeded to jump on him and stayed there, hitting away on him until she was pulled away by other sheriffs. Cooper, of course, was arrested and charged with criminal provocation and was held in the jail for 11 hours. The whole time she was in the jail, she was singing spirituals in the cell. Now, the other sheriff's deputies were starting to get worried because now there was getting press coverage and there was a lot of talk about what she had done. So they decided to release her before Clark got back to the prison and could attack her again. She never gave up. She never backed down, even when she was called an aggressor by the media and she was threatened with attempted murder charges. Um, she lived to be 100 and was a model of courage for others in the movement from that point forward. She said, having people look at you and not see you as human, I just got tired of it. So that's how she came to do what she did. Leroy Moton was a bright young activist from Selma. At 19, he was full of enthusiasm and wanted to make a difference. When the march concluded on the 25th of March, and he had been participating in all of the marches, the first, the second, the turnaround march, he was at all of them. Leroy helped Viola Liuzzo transport participants back to Selma. A car full of Klansmen saw Moton with Viola and did not like it. They changed his life and hers forever. After the events on March 25th, he continued to register voters in Illinois, Michigan, and Georgia before settling in Hartford, Connecticut in 1969. He married, had a son, served as a foreman and a machinist at an automotive place in Windsor, Connecticut for 35 years. But he was haunted by Viola's death and was terrified to drive on dark two-lane highways. Time was, he said, I wished it was me instead of her. She had 5 kids. He said he thought about it every day. He also lived long enough to see the Voting Rights Act threatened more than once. And this to him was one of the hardest things to take because it meant that Viola, in some ways, had died in vain. Now, all tensions build as activists are determined to move forward after Bloody Sunday. Celebrities and ordinary people join the marches alike. People of all ages and backgrounds flock to Selma. Um, these were some of the scenes in the days before that final 5-day march, which started on the 21st of March and ended on the 25th. So today we would be halfway through that march in Selma. The march began at Brown's Chapel in Selma and concluded on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol. The march was led by King and other civil rights leaders like Ralph Abernathy, and the marchers were protected by federalized National Guard troops because they were afraid that the marchers were going to be attacked en route because the tensions were still so high. People did not want that march to go on. And after several attempts, the activists were ready to go, and the townspeople and other anti civil rights folks were ready to take them on. The numbers of the marchers grew along the way, reaching an estimated 25,000 people by the time they reached Montgomery. Now, the interesting thing is when the march first started, the reason it took so long, they went 50 miles, but it took long because they were at first only allowed to have 300 folks marching at one time. And they were also relegated to certain hours that they could march. Now, Viola, we're going to change the world. One day they'll write about us, you'll see. That's her famous quote that's based on her excitement and enthusiasm to go down and do the work that they were doing. Now, Viola is a housewife. She's enrolled in Wayne State University at the time of the march. Sorry, allergies. She gets all revved up and ready to go down to Detroit. I'm sorry, down to Selma, because she had participated in a sympathy march in Detroit. She had been involved in activities and marches and registering folks to vote in Detroit for quite some time. She was one of many who hear Dr. King's call. Now, Viola was born April 11th, 1925 in California, PA, but she was raised in the Jim Crow South, the elder daughter of Eva and Herbert Gregg, who was a coal miner. Her mother was a teacher. The family moved to Georgia from Pennsylvania, and Herbert unfortunately lost a hand in a mining accident. So now the family, there's two daughters now, is solely dependent on Eva's wages. They moved to Tennessee hoping that they will have better job opportunities for her. She did get a teaching job in Tennessee, but the family was very poor. They lived in one-room shacks with no running water. The schools that Viola attended did not have adequate supplies, so her learning was kind of sketchy. Also, because they moved a lot, as her mother tried to find better teaching jobs, and they tried to find a location or some sort of work that Herbert could do. In 1941, the Gregg family moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan. At that point, Viola drops out of high school after a year and elopes at the age of 16. But like many young marriages, it doesn't last, and she returns home to her family. 2 years later, the Gregg family moves to Detroit, which was segregated by race. There were a lot of tension between whites and blacks as they competed for not only jobs but housing in the city. In the early 1940s, there was violence and a lot of rioting between ethnic groups, and Viola witnessed some of these, which later influences her civil rights work. She remembers what she's seen and she wants to be part of the solution. In 1943, she marries George Argyris. He's the manager of the restaurant where she works. They have two children, Penny and Evangeline Mary, but it does not last, and they divorce in 1949. And here is a young Viola with her first daughter as a young mom. People said that Viola was a true mother. She would take care of everybody. She watched out for people. She would talk to her kids' friends if they seemed to be lost or unhappy. She did that with colleagues. So she had a really big heart and a caring disposition. Now, 2 years after she is divorced, she marries Anthony Liuzzo. He is a business agent at Local 247 in Detroit. They have three children together, Tommy, Anthony Jr., and Sally. They also raise her first two daughters. Um, Her children remember her as always standing up for what she believed in and to be fair and just. And actually, here's an example of some of those things she did for being fair and just. She didn't like Detroit's laws that allowed students to drop out of school very easily. She thought people should really work to try to keep their kids in school, and the schools and the administration should be helping with that as well. So, as a protest, she temporarily withdrew her own children from public school to express her opposition to these laws. Now, because she had homeschooled them for 2 months and she did it publicly, she was arrested. She pled guilty and she was placed on probation, but she didn't care. She's like, this is important and I am going to take action. And these are pictures of Viola with her kids and her kids down below there. Um, Now, Sarah and Viola. Sarah Evans was Viola's best friend, and they met kind of in a weird way. Sarah is a black woman, about 10 years older than Viola, but they became the best of friends. And Sarah says she often thinks of the strange white woman who treated her as an equal from the very first day they met back in the wartime when white folks did not do that. Sarah had been working as a clerk in a little store, and Pepper during the war was rationed. Now, the store had some, but the boss kept it under the counter for his special customers. And Sarah said she can't say why, but she contradicted her boss when he said there was no pepper and said, "No, we've got some under the counter," when Viola came into the store to ask for it. Viola said to her, "You're my kind of people." And later, by sheer coincidence, they met again in a home where Sarah was babysitting. It turns out that redhead, Viola, we always think of her as a blonde, but she actually was originally redhead. Uh, she lived in the flat upstairs. The two soon became best friends, Vi and Sarah, Sarah and Vi. We were like sisters, Sarah said. Later, when Vi had her children, five in all, she would pay Sarah and her husband to come and help around the house and to help with the kids. And there is Viola and Sarah. Now, it was, of course, odd, and a lot of people did not like that friendship because they did not hold back on it. They were very public about the fact that they were friends. And it's funny, it reminds me also of Teamster Joe Nero. His best friend was also white, and he did not do anything to hide that as well. Um, what nobody knew, though, about Viola was that she would go over to Sarah's house and help her clean up sometimes too. And it had to be said, neither one of them was a very immaculate housekeeper. So they would help each other out. And people thought that was really weird. It was fine if Viola had Sarah as her housekeeper, but to go over and help her too, no, that was not good. But Viola's reaction was, "Sarah, there isn't any difference between us except that I'm lucky and I can pay you." And she wanted to do that. She wanted to help Sarah's family. Uh, and Sarah said she was something else. She didn't think like other white folks. She sure didn't. Mary, her daughter, said the most common question she gets from people is wanting to know how she feels about her mother leaving her children to go to Selma. And her response was, "The truth is, my mother loved us enough to want this to be a better world. The question isn't why did my mother go? It's why didn't everybody go?" Sarah encouraged her to join the Detroit area NAACP, and she was the only white member. But she worried when Viola said she was going to go down south. She started talking about it after Bloody Sunday, and then after James Rebb was killed, she really started to become determined to go. Um, Sarah said to her, "They don't think like you down there, honey." But Viola just wanted to make sure that everybody was treated fair. So on March 16th, the day of Reb's memorial, Viola took part in a protest at Wayne State. She decided she had to do more. So she called her husband and told him she would be traveling to Selma in response to King's Call. She said to him, "It's everybody's fight." Kissing her husband goodbye, husband and kids goodbye, and heading down south. Anthony, Tony Luizzo, was really worried about her going. But he knew he couldn't stand in her way. He knew that this had been brewing since Bloody Sunday, and there really wasn't much that he could do about it. Um, and she said to Sarah in their last conversation, she said, "Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm going to be fine." And then she paused and said to Sarah, "Will you do me a favor? Say yes or no before I tell you what it is." Sarah said yes. And she said, "If I don't come back, will you look after my children?" And Sarah said, "I told her I would." And then Sarah says, "The call came when I was sound asleep, well past midnight." She said she drove as fast as she could to get over to Viola's house, which was near 7 Mile in Detroit. And she was met with a scene of reporters and cameras and scared, crying children. And she did do her best from that moment on. She raised Viola's children along with her own. They had shot Viola to death that night after that march as she was driving a young black man back to Montgomery from Selma. They chased her in that 63 baby blue Oldsmobile down and put a bullet into her head and crowed happily over learning they had done after having done the deed. And these are Sarah's memories of that terrible night when Viola was killed. Viola was, by all descriptions, an extraordinary woman. At age 36, with 5 kids at home, she went back to school to become a medical lab technician. And she graduated with top honors, but only worked for a few months because she quit her job in protest over the way female secretaries were treated. On March 7th, she and her brother-in-law were watching the 11 o'clock news when they saw the first film clips of Bloody Sunday. She was devastated by what she saw and brooded over it for several days. And then she found out about the death of James Rebb. So she heads to Selma. She's still full of energy after 3 long days of shuttling marchers between Montgomery and Selma. She was a stranger when she arrived in Selma 6 days earlier, but she becomes known as a tireless, cheerful worker. A priest from Chicago who had been on the march said her energy, enthusiasm, and compassion were contagious and put many of us to shame. She sang songs from the march as she turned her Oldsmobile back toward Montgomery for another load of marchers. Now, as she is doing this, and Sarah had thought she was taking Leroy Moton back, but he actually was a young activist who was riding with her to help her drive these folks back and forth after the march was over. Moton was surprised at her nonchalance when they discovered that they were being followed by a carload of white men. And she reacted by saying, "These white people are crazy," and she pressed on the accelerator. At the time, white woman seen driving a car carrying a black man was in danger of being attacked by racist. They were on a dark and lonely road, and she began to realize they might be in trouble. She tries to outrun the men, and as Moten remembers, she sang, "We shall overcome," but it was reported then that the Klansmen pulled alongside her car and fired the fatal bullets into the car. Viola died instantly. She was shot in the head. Moten was injured, but he stayed in the car until he was sure the men were gone. They were gloating that they had killed him as well, hung around talking about it a little bit. So he stayed with Viola's body on top of him for several hours until he was sure the coast was clear. President Lyndon Johnson called Viola's husband, Anthony, and declared, "I don't think she died in vain because this is going to be a battle, an all out one as far as I'm concerned." Um, Even though Viola's death brought a number of attempts to discredit her, many historians consider Viola's murder as the impetus for the passage of the Nationwide Voting Rights Act of 1965. Previously, the act had been stalled in Congress. And actually, it's funny because it was Teamster women on a drive motorcade um, later that summer who also took action and pushed to have that that legislation brought off the table and to the Senate floor. And here we have the car after she was shot, and Leroy is talking to the press right after everything had happened. Viola's killers brag about her death. And like I said, they think they've killed Moten as well. Jimmy Hoffa hears about this and immediately charters a plane to bring her body back home. Viola's funeral, various pictures from her funeral, and this is a very famous Teamster picture with Joe Canal, Jimmy Hoffa, Harold Gibbons, and Martin Luther King seated together at the funeral. Now, here is a picture of President Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 3 men are tried for Viola's murder. There are several trials, but there are no charges. All-white jury in the first trial acquits them. There is a second trial that is brought, and it is a hung jury. So, like I said, the first trial was a hung jury, and then the second was an acquittal, despite eyewitness testimony from an FBI informant who was in the car. He was the fourth passenger in the car. Federal juries finally convict the Klansmen, who were Billy Lee Thomas, Michael Wilkins, and Charles Eaton, of violating Viola's civil rights. And they got 10 years in prison for that. Not the sentence they should have got, but at least they did receive a sentence. Roe was indicted for murder, but that case failed because he had immunity from prosecution because of the deal he made as the informant for testifying against the other Klansmen. The Liuzzo family sued the FBI several times, but the court rejected their claims, finding no evidence of FBI involvement or conspiracy. But what I can say to that is that a lot of people, I'm going to go back to that one. A lot of people said that they turned a blind eye, that Roe was very dangerous. He was involved in a lot of the violence on Bloody Sunday and other acts of violence against Black residents in Selma, that he helped orchestrate some of the events that happened, and they felt that the FBI knew this, and so that caused them to have a role actually in Viola's death, but the government obviously did not see it that way. Viola's name and reputation are smeared by racist groups and the FBI. Crosses are burned at her family's home, and her children, ages 6 to 18, were taunted and pelted with rocks. Her husband, Tony, had to hire armed guards to protect their home, and he never really recovered from her death. He died within 12 years of her death. The kids suffered from trauma, although Sarah did her best to keep her promise to Viola. The trauma was just too much for some of the kids. It took the family 25 years to get her name and FBI file cleared. The movie The Home of the Brave, which you can get on Amazon and probably other outlets, tells that story of how they had to clear her name. And here you also see there is a copy there of her FBI file and the memorial stone that the Southern Christian Leadership women had erected in her honor. And those women still are part of the group, as we are as Teamsters that go and help keep her memorial clean and with flowers on it and whatnot. She was killed by the KKK, smeared by the FBI. And finally, the civil rights martyr gets recognized as a hero. There is a park in Detroit that is the Viola Liuzzo Park. There are a statue of her and a memorial to her and to Sarah Evans, um, honoring her for her deeds. And then here in this picture, that is her sister, Mary Rose, accepting an award at the day the park was christened. This is the statue. They chose to have it of her walking in the march, carrying her shoes as she did toward the end of the march. And then this memorial went up for Sarah and Viola together, sisters in life, sisters in struggle. And then what Viola saw when she was at that march, the many scenes that she witnessed, these were the things that she saw on the nightly news that caused her to want to go to Selma. She saw Teamsters there. This is Teamsters Local 239. She saw movie stars, Charlton Heston, James Baldwin, Marlon Brando, Joan Baez, Susan Sarandon. But it wasn't just stars. Veterans from all over came to the march. Parnell Roberts, some of you may be old enough to remember, he played on Bonanza, and then later he was Trapper John M.D. But at this point, he's not famous, but he is coming to this march. Leonard Bernstein performed at night for the marchers, as did Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul and Mary, Lena Horne, and a bunch more. Now, what was interesting is there was no stage for them to perform on, so local funeral home loaned empty coffins to use to build a stage. Everyone, marchers and performers alike, put in long days. As you can see by the feet there of one marcher. Teamsters Joint Council 16 sends a boatload of supplies to help the marchers down in Selma: food, medical supplies, water, whatever was needed at the march site. And the marchers go the distance, even the young ones. There were many young children that were part of that march. Here they are on the road. There they are crossing finally the Pettus Bridge. And here are just some more of the varied people that came to that march to lend their support to the effort for not only voting rights, but other freedoms for Black residents there and all across the country. And here is Viola actually on the march, probably shortly before she was killed. March 25th, as they arrive in Selma, this is what the crowd looked like. 25,000 and more members, marchers attending. And there we have Viola Liuzzo, a true light to follow. And that is my story of Viola and Selma. Anybody have any questions or comments? Nothing?
Yes, Karen, I have a question and a few comments. Once again, thank you for your presentation um, on this little known history outside of the Teamster world. And that's a pretty unfortunate thing to say, but hopefully people on this Zoom and this watching this program will spread the word a little bit beyond the Teamster world. Um, During the presentation, you said that the Klansmen were put on trial for her murder. Were anyone put on trial for shooting the individuals that were in the car that survived? Or were they just
No,
relative?
the only person that was in the car was Leroy Moton, and he was injured, but he survived.
Right.
But no, that he was just a young black guy. They weren't going to worry about that. And he wasn't critically injured, so they didn't even attempt to bring charges against anybody for him. Yep,
Okay. So one of the many things I like about what you've done today is that you've recast in part the civil rights movement and the Selma story, not as a narrative of one or two great individuals, either Dr. King and or John Lewis, the two folks who often get the focus, but you've cast your light broadly on a wide cast of characters, kind of reminding us that this is a movement,
yeah,
and it is composed of rank and file people who have life stories, biographies that lead them to this point. But for all of their participation, this couldn't have happened. And so this is very much a collective endeavor, and that's what you've shown here. My question has to do with the FBI, its role after her death.
mhm,
And so you alluded to a campaign of vilification. Um, could you say more about
sure,
the FBI's role
yeah.
in all of this?
And I think as I was looking through, I saw I had a couple spelling errors, and then I think one slide is actually missing too when I went through and edited. And that was where I talk more about the FBI. Hoover just went after her. He was not about to have some white woman but involved in labor with that Jimmy Hoffa be a martyr for the civil rights movement. And so he immediately came out with stories about she was a drug user, that she was having sex with black leaders, and that she was an unfit mother, all of this kind of stuff saying about her. And, obviously that wasn't in any way true, but they even tried to push the story. One of the cops, when they found her body after she was shot, tried to say, and when an FBI agent was with him, and they tried to say that she had puncture wounds in her arm from shooting up with drugs. And of course, when they did the autopsy, there were no puncture wounds at all. And she was, a 39-year-old housewife with 5 kids. But Hoover kept it up. He did not let it go. He had them investigate her family, her extended family, looking for any dirt that they could dig up on her so that people would not see her as a hero, that she would be discredited, and that the march and everything that she stood for would be discredited. And they did a good job. I mean, her family was, destroyed. Her kids, were taunted for years afterwards for being the children of that drug addict woman that was down there with those black people in the South. And, it was really difficult. Um, and like I said, it took 25 years to clear her name, and nothing could be done until Hoover died. And one of the articles that I was reading, one of the activists said, that he called him that fascist in a dress, did everything he could to destroy Viola, which I thought was a pretty funny way to describe J. Edgar Hoover. So that was what went on there.
Shocking, shocking that the top law enforcement official of the United States might not be on the side of law.
Right. Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Hi, it's Anthony. I just want to say Karen, you always do a beautiful job, but more importantly, um, the HRDC, my assistant director, Ruben Torres. I also had Paul Trujillo, and I had some other people. We were able to march for the 60th anniversary of the Independence Bridge. More importantly, go to Viola's stone where the memorial is over there. Was able to place flowers, a broken wheel, which was a great idea by the people that are my team, Paul Trujillo, Ruben Torres, and lay praying hands at her memorial. And it's beautiful that it's gated because we saw some vandalism over there still. To this day, with a broken heart, there are still racist people that go over there and toss stuff on her property. Thank God it is being watched over by the church that's beside her memorial. And it's just, it's still sad to this day that people have that hatred in their heart.
Yeah, it is.
But I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I was lucky enough to attend the 50th anniversary and march over the bridge. And that was an incredible experience because some of the folks like Amelia Boynton were still alive. So that was a great experience as well. But I agree. I love the fact that we now, the Teamsters, have put an eternal light with those hands on Viola so that she will always be remembered for what she did. Everybody's so quiet today.
We're just basking in your glow, Karen.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Alex, no questions?
No, as always, I think it was a beautiful presentation, and just kind of piggyback off what Anthony said, just the hatred for someone who was trying to shine light on a gloomy situation is eye opening. But no, I thought it was beautiful.
Well, you know, the thing that I hope is that the more we talk about these things, and as Eric said, one of my things is, you know, Dr. King was great, Ralph Abernathy was great, but so many ordinary people participated and lent their lives, their time, their energy to this movement. And like the Courageous Eight, nobody knows who the Courageous Eight are. And that's a shame. And so I hope that by doing this, that you guys will, you know, go home and be like, did you know there was a Courageous Eight and talk about these things? And there are a number of wonderful articles online that you can read about how this activism began and how it spread and grew. And I would encourage you, just get online, just put in Selma, put in Viola Liuzzo, put in any of those names that I talked about today. Jimmy Lee Jackson, you know, the guy was just trying to protect his mother and ends up paying for it with his life. James Rebb, a preacher who they wouldn't even allow in the hospital in Selma. So take the time to look at some of those things and find out more for yourself, and maybe do presentations at your own local on some of this stuff. Because I'll bet every local has people that went to these marches and or their kids still alive, and you can have your own personal story with those things. All right, well, if nobody else has any questions, if the folks on the team will stay on, we will close out this session. Thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. I love seeing not the smiling faces because you all got your cameras off, but the little black spaces with your names. So thank you again.